Hello and welcome to our next edition in the Food Law series, and I'm really delighted today that Katharina Müller has joined us from Osborne Clarke's Cologne office. And we thought it would be really interesting to talk a little bit about what it means to set up a food business in Germany and some of the implications that go with that, and how that differs with the setup in the UK. So welcome, Katharina. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with just understanding a little bit about registration, because as a food business operator here in the UK, you need to register with your local authority. So are there similar registration requirements in Germany?
Regardless of what business you set up in Germany, you firstly have to register with the trade office, the Gewerbeamt, which is the German term for it, which will check a bit the background of the persons handling the business. But if you are setting up a food business, you also have to contact the health department, and they will give you some instructions with regard to the Infection Protection Act and how and what you have to oblige with when you set up your business. You have to get back with that to the trade office to register.
I see. And what about employees? Is there anything specific for them?
Yes, employees who are handling food and processing food need a clearance certificate, which is one part and mostly health related, but also they pose some personal questions, and there might be some questions around whether you've been working in this business before, and if there's been some mishandling of food, then you might be prohibited from working in that business again.
Oh, I see. And so, I mean, once you've gone through the registration, the actual sort of monitoring and sort of overseeing of food businesses, that operates differently at a local level and at a federal level, I think.
Well, it's firstly the task of the local authorities. So local means the individual states, but also within the individual states of Germany, nearly every town has its own health department. So it's smaller, obviously. So if there was to be anything that you as a consumer notice in a restaurant, for example, you can contact them and they will monitor that, they will investigate, but also there are from time to time investigation. They check the restaurants, but also the other food processing businesses as well.
So what role does the federal government play in this?
Well, they support the local authorities, but also if there was to be a case that is not only in one country, but also in other countries of Germany, they will take over and they will make sure that it's handled in an altogether version.
And so what about enforcement then? If a problem was found, then is that managed at a local level or at a federal level?
That's first of all managed at a local level. That's a bit due to our history. We are very focused on federal states, on individual states. So they tend to like to have the power with them. So it's basically, first of all, it's at the local level. But as I said, if it's a bigger case, they will work together.
And who can be investigated? Is it both the kind of the corporate and individuals within a corporate that can be looked at?
Yes, it will be, obviously will be the corporate, but it will especially be the managing directors, because they have to set up a system within the business to make sure that the food is processed and handled properly. So if they were to fail at setting up a proper system of controlling, of monitoring, they will be held liable. They can be fined, but also, well, in a really worst case scenario, they can even be awarded a prison sentence of 3 years, or if it's like really grave, it can be up to 5 years.
Right, so there's personal liability, there's corporate liability, and do you have sort of any sense of how often individuals might be targeted versus a company, or?
Well, as in Germany, we don't have the option to have a criminal enforcement towards a company, so a company can't be liable in a criminal sense. They can be fined, but they cannot be liable in a criminal sense. So if it was to be a really grave case, it will be the managing directors. But to be open and honest, it's most often it's considered a smaller public offense, and then it will be a smaller fine. And that is generally, even if it's awarded towards the manager, it's paid by the company.
Oh, I see. So the company,
acceptable.
So it's acceptable for the company to pay the fine. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, and so, I mean, another kind of big difference between the UK and Germany is the existence of the Works Council. So I don't know, I mean, it might be helpful actually just to go right back to basics and just explain a little bit about what the Works Council is, what it does.
So within a company, that has, well, first of all, there is no duty of the company to establish a works council. It's up to the employees to elect a works council. And if they elected a works council, the works council can participate within the company. It's a body representing the employees. And for example, it has, well, we call it a co-determination right, but it's basically different forms of co-determination. There's an information right, there's a right to be heard, and then there's a real co-determination right to participate in decisions. To make it a bit more understandable, maybe, for example, if a company plans to hire a certain number of employees or has just plans to restructure, if it's really the planning state, then the Works Council has to be informed. If a company was to dismiss one employee, then the Works Council has to be heard. The Works Council can give its opinion, but even if it does not consent to the dismissal, the employer can dismiss the employee. And finally, there's the real co-determination rights. If there was to be a restructuring process, for example, the Works Council really has the right to discuss and negotiate with the employer about the restructuring measures. And without the Works Council agreement, the employer cannot start the process. So coming back to our food businesses, as food businesses need a certain system of training employees, of monitoring how these employees are trained, etc. This is all subject to real co-determination. So co-determination, so of those three rights, they actually positively need the consent of the Works Council. If you were to establish an e-learning system in your works, for example, then you really need to sit down, negotiate about the content of the system, about the data processed, about the effects on the employee with your Works Council, and only after reaching an agreement, which is a Works Council agreement, really a written agreement between the Works Council and the employer cannot introduce the e-learning system.
Gosh, okay. And what sort of time can that take to kind of get agreement?
Well, it depends. Well, that's a really difficult question. It depends a bit on how you've been working with your Works Council in the past. If you have a good relationship with your Works Council, that can be done quite easily in a couple of weeks. I've had restructuring measures done in 2 weeks. But if the relationship between the employer or the managing directors, basically the persons working with the Works Council, is, well, let's say not so good, that it can take you months. And if you do not come to an agreement, you can reach out to well, we call it Einigungsstelle, so it's a body that can then take a decision, but that can take, I've seen procedures taking up to 6 months or even longer.
Gosh, okay.
So it can really stop your business.
Do you have any sort of advice or tips for businesses that are perhaps watching this and thinking about setting up in Germany or wanting to expand their business into Germany? Do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, the first decisions to be taken is, if you already have a business in the UK, how you want to corporate-wise structure it. If you want to have your own entity in Germany, the pros and cons, well, that's employment-wise, but also tax-wise. Then in terms of food is what you really need to do is either you hire somebody who is really qualified in that sector and gives you sound advice on how to set this up, or you have to make sure that the people working that part for your business are really into the regulations in Germany as well, or advised accordingly.
Katharina, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for taking us through that. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.